We are here to talk about Meetups We Love and how to scale them. I'm Elaine. Hello. I work at Fastly. We are an edge cloud platform, which is fancy talk for we have a CDN, a load balancer, a WAF, and image optimization. I am the senior communications manager there, which means that I run our PR channel, our social channels, and I collaborate with customers on special projects. Before that, I ran community at Fastly and previously at Engine Yard. And at Fastly, I built our open source program. So if you have any open source projects and need a CDN that's for free, come visit me after this talk. Before that, I went to Wellesley College and graduated with a degree in neuroscience. That is Hillary Clinton on the left. That's probably a story for another time. And I'm a core member of Papers We Love, the organization, and a co-organizer of the San Francisco chapter, which is the largest of all the Papers We Love in the world. So this is definitely how I'm feeling right now. I coach speaking a lot. I force my engineers to go to conferences and do what I'm doing right now. And I'm tasting my own medicine, and it is real rough, but hopefully we'll make it and we'll be okay. So this is the story about how we started Papers We Love and grew it. You're going to see this acronym a lot. But it's not just about a meetup. It's about how we scaled a GitHub repo and a tiny group into a whole worldwide organization. These are things that you can apply to your own meetup or to open source projects or even to a small group at work. This is also the story about how I was conned into all of this. I was going to have this very neutral story about how my co-organizer and I just wanted to try our hand at a meetup, and we really liked papers, and it was great, and it was easy, but no one really wants to start a meetup because it's super fucking hard. So what is Papers We Love? Papers We Love is a meetup that's posed at the intersection of academia and industry. What this means is that an expert, either from industry or academia, comes to our meetup once a month and gives a talk on a paper, an academic paper, that has inspired them or their work. Has anyone been to a Papers We Love meetup before? Is anyone here an organizer of Papers We Love? That's awesome. What chapter? Yeah. Awesome. Has anyone here spoken? Very cool. Okay. So this is what our map currently looks like. We have Papers We Love chapters all over the world, and we're setting up new ones all the time. But this is where it started. The origins go a little bit further back. At the end of 2013, a group of people at one single company in New York got together and wanted a reading group. But eventually, a lot of their friends wanted to join in. More voices and more insight into the conversation really helps, especially when you're talking about really complex papers. And so it grew out of a small reading group and into a formal meetup. This happened in February 2014. So I'm going to dissect this whole story with lessons throughout, and if you have any questions, we can discuss afterward. We learned that you have to solve a void, and then you have to solve a problem that fill a void and solve a problem that you actually have. The foundation and success of an effort like this is based on the commitment of the organizers. And if an organizer believes that it's a problem that can benefit, or a solution that can benefit their problems, they're more likely to continue it and grow it and be really committed to it. It's also a lot easier to do this than to reverse engineer a meetup, to try and solve someone else's problems. You end up missing the mark a lot of the time. But you can pretty much guarantee that if you have some kind of issue, someone else in the world also has it. So these are some caveats that are pretty specific to Papers We Love, but the main goal here is to really show you that you have to know your territory. We wanted attendees and speakers both to be set up for success from the beginning, so we included a couple of articles about how to actually read papers in our repo. The truth is that everyone does it differently, and the more prepared you are in your own way, the better you are at discussion and for speaking. We do not have Papers We Love meetups as kind of cookbook type events or step-by-step implementation events. These are more to teach you the context of the paper, give you a little bit of insight into it, and maybe a possible algorithm for the problem that the authors were trying to examine. But again, it's giving you more of a framework to reason about the problem and less actually solving it concretely. So once the meetup got going in New York, they had a very popular speaker their first go around. His name was Michael Bernstein. He's fairly big on the internet. Don't tell him I said that. And he did a great talk. And alongside that, he published a blog post about why you should be reading papers. And this, the meetup itself was recorded. They were able to put out the video. There were a lot of tweets and photos around the meetup. And so San Francisco seemed like an easy place to follow suit. Both cities are major tech hubs, obviously, and also big academic hubs. So it posed a good bi-coastal symmetry between the two, and it posed a good question of whether one would do better than the other, what would better even mean, what would the content be like the second go-around, et cetera. So we started Papers We Love 2 in San Francisco. And then a note about the organizers here. We saw that in New York, the organizers came from a lot of different walks of life. You had a designer who used to be a sculptor. You had an engineer pursuing his PhD in CS. You had an industry engineer. And in San Francisco, there was a community person running it, who was me, and my co-organizer, Inez, who you will hear a lot about during this presentation, is an engineer. She's also from an academic background. And having organizers from different disciplines help give you a little bit more perspective on the content that you curate. It allowed the content to be planned outside of a vacuum and allowed us to kind of focus more on the diversity of the content and the format and the speakers. And that's where diversity should start. It's a top-down priority that should start with the organizers. It sets the tone for the entire group, the entire meetup, and it tells you how attendees should interact with each other and treat each other. So this is where we were 1 month after. So as I said earlier, this is where I kind of come in. My coworker Inez completely conned me into doing this. She was like, oh, I just want to do a small reading group. It's fine. Will you help me with like the event production? And then all of a sudden we had like a meetup page and then like 5 meetups scheduled after that, and a bunch of people came. It was not a small reading group, Inez. But we were really lucky that at the time the company that we were both working at was really invested in community, gave us a break, made sure that we had space and food and beer for everyone. And here she is. I was like, I'm going to tell a story about how we tried our hand at it. And she's like, no, I conned you. Like, it's a nice story, but like, no. So that's kind of where we're at. But I knew that like, if I was going to be committed to doing this, I wanted to do it my way. I've been working in community and events since graduating college, and I've been to a ton of conferences and meetups and events in the industry. And there are a lot of things I do not like about those events. Here are some of them. I don't like the hierarchy. I don't like feeling small or unimportant or lame because I work in marketing. I don't like getting lost on the trade show floor. I don't like walking around booths and people just trying to pitch at me or getting my email address for a t-shirt, which like I get because I have done that before, but still, it becomes a really impersonal experience in the whole, and attendees don't really love that. But I do think that this is changing a lot in the conference landscape in general in tech. Conferences are moving away from that impersonal experience, and people want to feel special and like they're a part of something greater. It's about the attendee experience and including them. That's what makes the experience meaningful. For me, I found that the more thought out the details and the more diverse the content and speakers are, the better. When organizers think about things like flow and bottlenecks and accessibility and diversity, those events really shine through and really make a mark on the attendee. I love seeing when you can like notice small, cool design details that are almost unnoticeable, or tracks of content that progress in a certain direction with a lot of different point of views and a lot of different speakers. Which brings us to our next lesson, which is diversity. And to me, that means involving as many different people in the community as you can and making a space for their voices to be heard. Because a single group of people is never going to have all the answers, and if they do, it's probably not a very good answer. So there are a lot of different ways to diversify an event like this. From the get-go, this meetup was going to be different because we were involving 2 different communities, academia and industry. And what's interesting about those 2 communities is that they both are categorized as pretty isolationist. You have academia as the ivory tower, and you have industry as the tech bubble. But so we were able to create a more symbiotic relationship between the two groups. Academia could bring new findings in and ideas, and industry was able to take those ideas and run with them and implement them in real life and at scale. And by catering to both of those communities, we were able to have an audience that was already going to be bigger than your average meetup anyway. And another byproduct of having this kind of diversity is you get to connect people who rarely interact in the real world. So we realized this really early on, actually during our first meetup in San Francisco. A young man named Ryan Kennedy, who was at the time working at Yammer, was implementing Dapper. And he presented at our first ever meetup about Dapper. And someone in the audience raised their hand and asked a question. Ryan couldn't answer it. Everyone kind of looked around. This is like 70 people in the room. And no one could really answer it until finally someone in the back raised their hand and answered the question. And of course, it was the author of the paper. And that was like a mind-blowing moment for us that we actually were able to bring these two people together. And that was our very first meetup. It was really, really special. And on the flip side of that, we've seen Peter Alvaro, which is this lovely bearded gentleman. Inez hates this slide. Sorry, Inez. But he was getting his PhD at Berkeley at the time, and he came to speak at Papers We Love, and people liked him so much that he ended up keynoting an industry conference. And eventually, Netflix offered him a collaboration where he was able to implement what he was writing his thesis about at Netflix at a massive scale. And it created this really cool tie between industry and academia on a whole different level. And this was academia also benefiting from industry, because the more that you're able to implement your methodology and your work at scale in real life, the better. Or otherwise, it remains in the academic sphere and very theoretical. My friend Chris, who I think some of you know, made the jump from industry to academia. He is getting his PhD right now, and he really drives the point home here, which is that the more that academics are able to see their work in industry, in tech companies, the better it is for them because they'll get more funding and more attention and more grants. So fast forward a little bit, keeping these lessons in mind, we started to grow a lot more. After San Francisco, we saw Papers We Love pop up in Montreal and DC and Singapore randomly. And we started thinking, what else can we do differently than other meetups? I have hosted so many of them and have done the same thing for so many of them, and I didn't want to do that anymore. No one likes pizza all the time. I am a wino. I don't like it when there's only beer. We started creating a San Francisco edition of the stickers to make it feel limited edition and special. I have some if you want them after this talk. These things seem really frivolous, but small touches like this make the event more memorable and make people want to come back. It becomes a question about inclusivity. What else can you do to make people feel comfortable and feel welcome? Which brings us to this very important point. We introduced our code of conduct really early on. In summation, be an adult, don't be a jerk. It's super important that you make a space that's welcoming and that people can have real discussions, especially people who are underrepresented normally, and especially in a room full of experts. We normally get this mix of people. We get a lot of first-timers for every meetup, and we get a lot of experts. You want those people, both of them actually, to feel comfortable talking to each other and ask questions and have a real discussion without feeling ashamed or embarrassed. This allows you to signal safety as an organizer and that a group cares about the attendee. So we also learned during this time that we have to mix our experts. So we knew from the beginning that we were going to have a mixed bag because we weren't going to lean toward academia or industry for speakers. We were going to go to both. Speaker diversity extends way beyond that, right? We want people from multiple backgrounds involved in speaking so that our speakers don't come from the same demographic all the time, and that way you get more perspective and more voices in the conversation. And when you're producing an event where by nature you take a massive, really complex piece of content and try and digest it in smaller ways, you need more points of view and more voices in the discussion. Additionally, don't write off junior devs. They definitely have interesting insights as well. Never mix your quality. We in San Francisco, and I know in New York and a lot of other papers we love, have made a massive effort to empower our speakers. We make sure that we are able to train them if they need that. If they need extra help prepping the content or going through a paper, we will set aside time in San Francisco to do that. We'll have them run through their meetup talk, and that makes the speaker really happy and want to speak elsewhere, which is really great. And it makes the attendee happy and learning, and everyone wins. And that doesn't mean that we haven't fucked up. I'm lucky to live in San Francisco, where we have a lot of everything, right? We have a ton of speakers, and a ton of experts, and a ton of venues, and a ton of money flowing through all of this community stuff. And it doesn't mean that bad things don't happen. We've had speakers have health emergencies literally an hour before. We've had people... We had one speaker who got hit by a car, not on their way to the meetup, but shortly before. They're okay, but what do you do in these cases? You really have to think on your feet and think quickly. So in our case, what we did is we were able to tap into our immediate network, which again, we're lucky that we're in San Francisco. We had a friend who was already going to present a paper at a conference a couple of weeks after Papers We Love. So we tapped her to speak, and she did, and it was amazing, and everything worked out. But you really have to think really critically, and it does start with your immediate network. So if this happens to you, go to your coworkers, go to your friends, think up something. I recommend not canceling the meetup an hour before. So we kept growing, and as we did so, we tackled more lessons and experienced more as organizers. I hate this one. I call this the well, actually. We deal with it a lot, and we try and address it as it comes. So we have the conversation play out once it starts, and then we'll follow up immediately after being like, if you want to discuss this more in real time, then do it after the event. And I'm sorry, but we all feel like this a lot of the time when that happens. Internally, we don't say it out loud. And to that point, we wanted to encourage less experienced speakers to speak. So 2 years ago, Inez and I were looking at our planned out meetups for the year. We realized that we had speakers booked until the end of December. It was the summer, which is crazy. To have 6 speakers lined up for each month is insane. She definitely strong-armed speakers a lot, but that's a whole nother conversation. So we needed some room for people to come in and try their hand at speaking, if they were inexperienced, if they wanted to, discuss a paper. And so we decided to create Papers We Love Minis, which is a small lightning talk before the main talk, 10 to 15 minutes. And that encouraged, again, less experienced speakers and developers to speak, and also perfectly experienced normal speakers to give talks as well. And producing more content in that way has been really helpful for us. So then we grew even more. Seattle, Santa Monica, Winnipeg, St. Louis, Amsterdam, Hyderabad over the next 6 months. So this is a bit over a year since we started Papers We Love at this point. And even looking back recently, it's crazy how quickly the word of Papers We Love spread. And it wasn't corporate backed, and it's still not, but it was no one's main job to evangelize Papers We Love. It just became everyone's job, and people got really involved and really committed to it, even as attendees. So what exactly made it spread? To me, I think it's content diversity. The theme of academia and industry obviously touches on a lot of different areas in computer science and technology, and we were able to consistently switch up the content month to month and keep our audience on their toes. So we covered things like graphics, distributed systems, internet protocols, design, and we even branched out to cover things like policy eventually, which is very cool. We definitely had to question our own biases as well. So as organizers, we have to make sure that we look at our own mechanisms to make sure content remains on point and that the discussion is good. We had David Brockman come in and discuss how he debunked a very well-known paper about canvassing in 2014. This was a huge deal. This paper initially rocked the poli-sci academia world and changed the way that people canvassed and the way that academic funding in poli-sci was being distributed. It disrupted everything, and it got to be a mainstream paper. The New York Times covered it, New York Magazine covered it, This American Life did a big segment on it, and the debunking was even crazier. This had definitely happened before, but not on this scale. And this guy was like 26 when he did this. And it really puts our assumptions under question and makes us wonder whether papers were the correct vehicle for learning. It also obviously makes us question academic rigor and review. But basically, we bring in this kind of material to make sure that we're not keeping papers on a pedestal. We're not here to tell you that papers are the essential way to learn and to be a great engineer. And he risked his whole post-grad career for this. And this talk is online, you should watch it, it's amazing. Which brings us to this point, which is to keep and share the content. Content has been at the heart of what we do, obviously. It's a top priority. But on top of that, we want to make sure that the content is always accessible, both to people who are attending the meetup and afterward. So we try and record and publish as much as we can. And of course, we run into speed bumps if one of our venues doesn't have good AV, or the tape gets messed up, or people take a long time processing the videos. That's all fine. But we try and do it as much as we can. And on a good day, if you have a great talk in a great city with a lot of people in a tech center, you'll get around like 70 to 90 people at a meetup, right? But once you put that online, that just grows exponentially. And the more time goes on, the more the word of your paper or your meetup gets out, and your audience and reputation grows. And that, I think, has been really great in bolstering our reputation and the word of Papers We Love. So again, the caveat here is getting the content, which is way harder than it seems. And there are so many ways that we struggle with this. Knowledge accessibility is a theme in our organization, both as a fundamental goal and as a challenge. Licensing and paywalls get in the way of people downloading the papers to read before the meetup. And that means that sometimes our speakers even have to do some extra digging for the materials that they need to speak about. So sometimes we sneak into library archives. This is Brian Fink, who is also one of our San Francisco speakers. He works at VMware. He actually went into the Stanford CS archives, went to the library, talked to the special collections department, got the master copy of this thesis from 1984 because Stanford never digitized theses from the 1980s, and sat there in the library with this thesis, this master thesis, and took notes from the book cradle. And it's amazing that we have speakers that are so committed to our meetup that they can do this. We sometimes also deal with NDAs. We've had great vendors and great sponsors and venues that support us a lot and provide food and beverages for us, and will record our meetup and are really lovely to deal with. And then they have one of those Envoy iPad NDAs that seem relatively harmless, but if you read them very carefully, it does say that everything you learn on the property belongs to that corporation, which is really how are they going to enforce that? But it does become something that's very problematic. So now we have to ask our hosts if they have NDAs, and if they do, we ask if we can not sign them. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. So we don't have a perfect solution, but it never hurts to ask. We can't always circumvent paywalls or sneak into archives, but we make do with what we have. And asking is a huge part of both the speaker's responsibility and the organizers. We sometimes ask speakers repeatedly who never respond to us if they want to speak at Papers We Love. We just keep asking without trying to be creepy. Or another technique that I've learned is if they don't reply for multiple months, you go to a friend of theirs and ask that friend really casually if that person is available, and somehow try and get toward that person through that. But we've had folks email the authors of a paper to get more insight. We've even had folks come in and bring the speaker to the meetup, which has been incredible. So Paul Borrell from San Francisco, and I apologize that a lot of my stories are from San Francisco because that's where my meetup is, presented on a Leslie Lamport paper and actually brought Leslie Lamport to the meetup. And everyone was like, completely starstruck, and they were able to get their questions answered by Leslie Lamport, who, if you don't know, created Paxos and Lamport clocks and is very big in distributed systems. And that's not to say that people go to Papers We Love to hang out with celebs, but it is an interesting thing that happens to us. That said, we do try and give people the tools to be successful at Papers We Love. I've mentioned having articles about having people learn to read papers on our repo. Keeping the repo up to date and populated is really important to the health of our organization. A lot of conversations about papers start there, which is great. And on top of that, we started developing more standardized templates about how to speak at these events and also how to create them. So this is a super quick primer. We can talk about it afterward if you want, but start with a passionate organizer, have them guilt a friend into helping, and find a really passionate speaker. Get a code of conduct. And then one of the hardest things to do is sending out that bat signal. In San Francisco, the environment for meetups is so crowded that it's actually hard to get people going to your meetup because there are tons of meetups happening all the time and people are exhausted. But sending out the bat signal on Twitter, in your Slack channels, having your friends get the word out on social media and beyond, having your company get behind you is very huge, or having your friends' companies get behind you is also really important. And if you need more help, you can join our Slack, which I'll talk about afterward. But also for us, what really, I think, set us apart is that we were able to bring two very different groups of people together because they shared a love of the same thing. I think once you get that kind of dynamic, no matter what your topic is, people are going to be interested. So back to the story. These meetups kept multiplying, and our main way to track growth and conversations was super fragmented. So it was like the comments of a YouTube video or tweets or on the GitHub occasionally. So at one point before the 2015 Strange Loop conference in St. Louis, we created a Slack channel within their conference instance. We wanted to see who at Strange Loop was a fan of Papers We Love or an organizer. So we tweeted out to test the waters and prime the group and see what was going on at Strange Loop with Papers We Love. And eventually we had a formal meta PWL meetup there. And it was packed. We took up the whole bar, and that's when we started to think that maybe we were onto something very, very interesting. So we devised a plan to start a global Slack channel, which is now like less sexy, but I'll talk about that later. And possibly more, maybe a conference, maybe something else. So the Slack channel thing is interesting at this point because everyone has a Slack channel. You have one with your friends, with your company, with your dog, with your mom. But it was a real turning point for us because we were able to take all of these people from all over the world and put them into one place and have them interact with each other directly and in real time. And that was huge for us. So at this point, we have over 700 people in the Slack. And we have a channel for each chapter, as well as a channel for people who want to start one, a chapter for speakers, a chapter for people who just want to talk about papers. We even have out of there a virtual Papers We Love meetup at this point, which is unreal. So we wanted to create a space for people to interact more directly. Organizers and attendees could talk directly to each other. And we saw some really interesting trends emerge when we were able to bring them all together. We saw that some locations of Papers We Love were more focused on a certain topic. Maybe it was design, maybe it was distributed systems. And that was cool. It was cool that we ended up building a template that worked for everyone and that you could incorporate into your own community needs. So eventually we decided to take the leap. First we formed Papers We Love Core, which is more of a guiding body for Papers We Love so we could help evangelize the brand more uniformly and have it be a place where planning a conference could be a bit easier. So we wanted something for Papers We Love Conf that in a day could basically capture the vibe and ethos of the organization and bring that global community together. I mean, we had people in Eastern Europe, in Western Europe, in Asia, in North America, South America, everywhere. We wanted those people to all meet face to face. So yeah. Ooh. So, okay. Sorry. We knew that the conference would really succeed if it were tied to another event. We went back to Strange Loop. Co-located events work very well, especially when they're very young. You see that during WWDC. There are a lot of app developer conferences. You see that before OSCON even, and you see that before academic conferences as well. Never be afraid to co-locate. So Papers We Love had to reflect Papers We Love Conf had to reflect Papers We Love. We wanted it to be more of an amalgam of events versus a totally separate, isolated event. What did that mean to us? We started out with diversity, again. That meant diversity of content, so we had a graphics talk and a programming languages talk and a networking talk. We also wanted to bring in speakers from all over the place. So we had people from Europe, from Asia, from America. It was unbelievable. And so we were able to fulfill these wish lists. We had closed captioning, which again echoes our efforts with accessibility. We curated all the content, and we had speakers from all over. This is not easy to do when your team is distributed. Half of the team was 3,000 miles away, and none of us were actually in St. Louis where the conference was happening. So that is not super easy. There are tools that you use, obviously, to make it a little bit easier. You probably already know them, but we had weekly Zoom meetings, we delegated tasks via Trello, we tracked our expenses and our sponsorship payments via Google Docs. Everyone had their marching orders, so we had some people who were canvassing for sponsors, we had people working on content, we had a designer working on the site and the brand. And Slack was a big help if there were questions or concerns, and it was good to have that real-time aspect. Those are the usual suspects, but keeping regimented is super crucial. So keeping on top of those meetings, keeping on top of people, making sure you follow up with them on everything. Everyone was in the Slack channel, and that was really helpful, but that's when you really have to over-communicate everything. And I decided to dig into the Harvard Business Review a little bit because I'm fancy. And according to Harvard, we hit the sweet spot for a distributed team, which is about 10 people working on the conference. They say that good remote teams have really good communication skills, high emotional intelligence, an ability to work independently, and people who are resilient and recover from shit when it goes wrong. And it was important to us, that last point, to have a lot of empathy, since, again, this was not our day job. This was completely like a side project. So things definitely went wrong, balls were dropped, and we were able to be understanding and resilient and talk it out. This is another thing that came out of the HBR. Observable candor, which really means that you have to trust your team and be really honest with your team. That led us to be more successful and have a less stressful process and execution when planning a conference like this, especially when there are so many moving parts and none of you are actually in St. Louis. So in the end, about 200 people showed up to Papers We Love Conf, which was bigger than we could have anticipated. We had a massive social media lift, which means that people really got to see the impact of this conference. And people were able to meet face-to-face who would never ultimately meet otherwise. People also were able to learn things that they couldn't in other places, including other conferences, which again was always a huge part of Papers We Love as an organization. One of my favorite stories from this is we had one of the speakers who was named Dahlia Malki talk about randomized gossip protocols. And that was huge for Fastly because many different parts of Fastly are built using a gossip protocol. And our CTO still watches that talk to this day because there is so much information condensed into one talk, into one place, that is almost impossible to find elsewhere. And I know that other companies have watched this talk and have fixed major bugs because of it, which is incredible. And this goes back to the first point, which is that we wanted to fill a void with what we were doing. We weren't trying to do it as like a vanity project. That said, there are a lot of things that we are still grappling with. We have an unwritten rule generally, and we enforce it, that you can't give a talk on your own paper. And that's not because you shouldn't be super proud of your own work, but it's because we wanted it to be an opportunity to boost up the work of others and to have to talk more about inspiration. It also means that you almost always get a new viewpoint on a subject. People are still afraid to ask dumb questions. And the key here is to make it clear that the experts and even very advanced people don't always have the answers to everything. There are no dumb questions, everyone knows this. And we produce these events to break down this complex content into digestible pieces. So we try and moderate the environment as much as we can. I know, it's adorable, right? It's great. We want to make sure that people aren't afraid to ask questions and to have discussions, and it goes back to the organizer level. We aren't hosting these meetups because we have all the answers to everything. We're not trying to show off. It's all a learning process and a discussion. This one is really tricky for us because we love our sponsors and we couldn't do anything, well, most things that we do without a sponsor, and that includes putting on a conference. But the key here is that we don't have talks where people pitch themselves or their products or their companies. And when we work with sponsors, we try and have a real conversation with them, walk them through the event and the premise, and make sure we create opportunities for them to present their company in okay ways. So sometimes that means more people from the company coming to the event or giving out free tickets or a small pitch before or between talks. Those things are fine. Curation is still really hard because for us, we have one meetup a month with 2 talks per meetup, which means that's 24 talks to curate and prep per year, which is a lot, as again, I said, it's not our main job. And it gets really hard to keep up with that. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to start bringing on new organizers and loosening up the reins a little bit, which I know Inez and I both have trouble doing. But we carry on. We keep growing, and people keep coming to our talks. And I think that we have helped usher in this era of academia leaning more on industry, and industry really going back to academia and asking more questions and implementing their work. So this is something my boss says. Good job, keep going, or my boss's boss, actually. We've grown, we've done a lot of things. We're in the process of organizing our 2nd conference, also in September. And we're also in the process of getting a 501c3 up and running, which means that we'll be a full-fledged nonprofit. And we'll be able to empower our community a lot more and have an even further reach. I wanted to throw this in because this is a chart of the growth of our San Francisco meetup since the beginning of the meetup. It motivates us to keep going and keep building, and it's just incredible to see the growth. Like, I never thought that we would have that kind of slope. And I believe that the red line for active members stays that way because we only have so much space in these venues, so only so many people can sign up for the meetup itself. So my advice here is find a paper or anything that you love. And part of, again, what makes Papers We Love so special is that we're able to join these 2 groups of people together who have a love of the same thing. You inevitably are going to get a special dynamic whenever you do this. Join your local chapter of Papers We Love, or whatever, really. And you can follow us on Twitter. They tweet about tacos a lot. Join our Slack channel. There are a lot of really interesting people in there, and they have a lot of good conversations that are even outside of just papers. And come to our conference, which is happening on September 28th. And that's it.